It was Labor Day weekend, and I was headed up to my uncle's cabin by the lake for our annual family get-together. I always loved going there as a kid. Swimming, fishing, camping under the stars. It was like a summer paradise. But this year felt different. I was 15, and this was the first time I'd be going without my parents. They were busy with work and told me to just drive up with my older cousin Tim, who was home from college. I didn't mind. Tim was cool, and I was excited to hang out with him and my other cousins at the lake house. The drive up was fine. Tim told me about college and all the parties he went to. I nodded along, a little intimidated by how grown up he seemed. After a few hours, we pulled into the long dirt driveway leading down to the cabins. The place looked exactly as I remembered it. Rustic wooden buildings nestled amongst the pines next to a glittering blue lake. Tim and I hauled our bags into the main cabin where my aunt and uncle greeted us. My other cousins, Mike and Connor, were already there playing video games on the couch. They briefly looked up to say hey before returning to their game. Later that afternoon, my uncle fired up the grill and we all ate hamburgers and hot dogs on the back deck overlooking the lake. As the sun began to set, some of my older cousins said they were going to head out to the local dive bar a few miles away. "Don't wait up for us," Tim said with a sly grin. They wanted to check out the Labor Day weekend party scene. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just typical older cousin hijinks. Boy, was I wrong. After they left, my younger cousins and I played card games for a few hours before deciding to watch a movie. Mike and Connor were engrossed in the comedy we'd put on, but I was distracted. I kept glancing out the window thinking I heard noises outside. Probably just your typical nighttime forest sounds, I told myself. When the movie ended, Mike and Connor headed up to bed while my aunt and uncle retired to their room downstairs. I got a blanket and pillow and tried to get comfortable on the couch, but as the sounds of crickets and croaking frogs echoed outside, I just couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. There was no cell phone service up here, so I had no way to reach my cousins at the bar, and the landline phone was notorious for not working. I tried to tell myself everything was fine. After all, we came here every year and nothing bad ever happened. But the ominous pit in my stomach remained. It must have been after 2 a.m. when I was startled awake. The noise that awoke me sounded like glass breaking. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. Silence followed. Several agonizing minutes passed before I heard what was unmistakably the backslider door creaking open. This was no animal. Someone was definitely inside the cabin. Paralyzed by fear, I remained frozen on the couch. The floorboards squeaked under the weight of footsteps trying to sneak quietly through the kitchen. A flashlight flicked on, the intruder clearly looking for valuables to snatch. My mind was racing, trying to think of what to do. I glanced at the fireplace poker and thought maybe I could try to defend myself. But before I could make a move, a figure emerged from the kitchen and into the living room. My blood went cold. It was Tim. Relief washed over me for a split second until I took in his disheveled appearance. His eyes were bloodshot and darting around manically. He looked completely deranged, almost like he was on drugs. My relief turned back to dread. Tim, I stammered. "What are you doing back? What's going on?" He didn't answer me. It was like he didn't even recognize me. His hands were shaking badly as he continued rummaging around with the flashlight. I noticed a large hunting knife sticking out of his back pocket. "Tim, you're scaring me." He pulled the knife out of his back pocket. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Put the knife down." Again, no response. It was like his mind was totally disconnected from reality. He started mumbling incoherently under his breath. I had no idea what drugs he might be on, but he was clearly not in the right state of mind. I considered trying to run to my aunt and uncle's room, but Tim was blocking my path. For the moment, I was trapped. I knew I had to keep trying to get through to him. "Tim, it's me, your cousin, can you hear me?" I said more forcefully. "You need to snap out of this." He paused for a second, shaking his head like he was trying to clear the haze. For a moment, I thought I was getting through, but then the vacuous look returned to his eyes. "I have to find her," he kept repeating. "She's here. I have to find her." I didn't know who he was talking about, but I could tell trying to reason with him was useless. His grip tightened on the hunting knife as he glanced toward the staircase where Mike and Connor were soundly sleeping. My window to act was closing. I had to do something to get that knife away from him. I was able to make my way over to the fireplace where the poker was while I was talking with Tim, Gripping the poker tightly, I lunged towards Tim, swinging with all my might. The iron rod collided with his wrist, making him howl in pain and drop the blade. I dove for the knife, grabbing it before he could recover. "Tim, stop!" I shouted, pointing the tip right at him. "I don't want to hurt you, but you need to snap out of this right now." Clutching his injured wrist, Tim stared back at me like a cornered animal. For the first time, a flash of recognition seemed to cross his face. "What's happening?" he muttered in a small voice, totally unlike himself. "I don't know where I am." He started to crumble to the floor. I rushed over to catch him before he hit the ground. He was shivering and incoherent, but at least now the vacant look was gone from his eyes. I knew the worst was over. I hoped. Just then, my aunt and uncle finally came out of their room after hearing the ruckus. This nightmarish ordeal was finally over. Things were chaotic for the next few hours. Tim was in pretty bad shape and needed to be taken to the hospital. The doctors said he had dangerously high levels of PCP and meth in his system. Apparently, the dive bar my cousins went to was pretty much just a drug den. The police were involved, but said they, unfortunately, see this a lot with the college crowd partying over Labor Day weekend. I still get chills thinking how close I came to being seriously hurt, or worse, by my own cousin in that altered state. The human mind under the influence of drugs is truly terrifying. Even good people can become monsters. Tim barely remembers anything from that night. He got mixed in with some really bad stuff trying to fit in with the wrong crowd. As for me, I never looked at family trips to the lake cabin the same way again. I used to love Labor Day weekends there. But now that place holds some really dark memories I'll never quite shake. I guess you never really know someone until you see their hidden shadows come into the light. The creepy events of last Labor Day were enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It started off like any other holiday weekend. My girlfriend Sam and I rented a cute little Airbnb cabin located on the outskirts of a small rural town. Our plan was to relax, go hiking, and enjoy having some time away from the hustle of everyday life. It seemed like the perfect getaway nestled deep in the woods, far from our busy everyday lives. But as soon as we arrived, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was off. If I had known then what we would experience during those 3 terrifying days, I never would have set foot near that remote cabin. But hindsight is 20/20, and now the horrific memories of that weekend will be seared into my mind forever. That first day we went into town to pick up groceries and check out the quaint main street shops. The place had a very welcoming vibe. Locals smiled and waved as we passed by, which seemed charming at the time, but felt ominous looking back. After stocking up on supplies, we headed to the cabin to unload everything. Sam was excitedly telling me about the Labor Day festival they held in town. Live music, food trucks, craft vendors. It sounded fun. We decided we'd head in the next day to check it out. My first inkling that something might be off came later that afternoon when we took the canoe out on the lake. The weather was perfect with barely any wind, but no matter which direction we paddled, the canoe felt like it kept getting turned back towards the cabin. Probably just a coincidence, I figured, but I still couldn't shake this strange feeling. That night we barbecued steak and veggies, then cuddled up to watch a movie. The cabin owner had told us to help ourselves to anything in the kitchen, including their selection of wines. So we decided to crack open a nice bottle of red. Halfway through the movie, I started feeling almost drunk. The wine must be more potent than I thought. Except, I'd only had 1 glass. Strange. Suddenly the cozy cabin vibe started feeling ominous. Weird coincidences kept piling up. Neither of us slept well that night. The bedroom was stuffy and Sam kept tossing and turning, saying she felt antsy. If I'm being honest, I felt the same uneasy, restless feeling. When we woke up the next morning, we decided to shrug off the previous day's weirdness and head into town for the Labor Day festival. The fresh air and crowd noise revitalized us immediately. It felt silly I'd been so paranoid. But the feeling didn't last long. As we walked the festival, checking out booths of homemade wares, I started noticing people, whispering. Whenever Sam and I passed by, conversations would stop as heads turned our way. The vibe was not overtly hostile, but something about us seemed to set the locals on edge. By early afternoon, I'd had enough. I suggested to Sam we just head back to the cabin and call it a day. She agreed. The odd vibes were starting to freak her out too. When we got back to the cabin, everything seemed normal at first. We went out on the dock to soak in some sunshine and reconnect away from the town's prying eyes. That's when Sam gasped and grabbed my arm. "Look!" She pointed to the canoe drifting across the lake, moving steadily away from us even though the water was completely still. No wind, no current, no understandable reason the canoe would be moving on its own like that. Now I was really weirded out. Something was very wrong with this lake, but the strangest part was still to come. We headed back inside to get ready to barbecue some chicken for dinner. As I was washing vegetables in the sink, I glanced out the window above the faucet. That's when I saw it. A face staring back at me through the glass. I yelled and jumped back, getting Sam's attention. She came running over asking what happened. Frantically, I described the pale, gaunt face I'd seen, but when we peered outside again, nothing. At that point, we were both ready to get the hell out of there. We decided to pack up and just drive home early in the morning. Neither of us wanted to spend another night. As darkness fell, we locked ourselves in the bedroom, not even wanting to walk around inside. Sam tried to reassure me it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But deep down, I think she sensed something was very wrong too. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear and we drifted off to sleep. I'm not sure what time it was when I awoke to the sound of footsteps creaking down the hallway, steadily approaching the bedroom. A wave of dread washed over me. Someone was inside the house. Sam sat up right next to me, woken by the noise too. The footsteps got closer and closer until they stopped right outside the door. We both huddled there, scarcely breathing, praying whoever it was would just go away. But the doorknob slowly started to turn. Sam shrieked and I jumped out of bed, grabbing the closest potential weapon, a table lamp. "Stay back," I yelled. "I'm armed." The unseen intruder hesitated. For a moment, I thought they might leave. But then the knob twisted open. The door creaked inward, and no one was there. Sam and I just stared dumbfounded into the empty hallway. The overhead light was still off. "What the hell?" Sam whispered. I had zero explanation. My mind could not comprehend what we'd just experienced. Neither of us slept another wink that night. As soon as the sun came up, we threw our bags into the trunk and sped off down the driveway, leaving that bizarre cabin in the rear view. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, a bad reaction to some tainted wine or something, but I knew deep down something sinister lurked in that area. The locals clearly knew it too. Why else would they act so strange when Sam and I came to town? I'll never forget the terror of that Labor Day weekend. It left me shaken to my core and questioning everything I thought I knew about the world. One thing's for sure, though. I'm sticking to hotels from now on. No more cabins in the woods for me. Ignorance really is bliss sometimes. I don't think I want to know what's out there lurking in the shadows. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I used to love amusement parks as a kid. The lights, sounds, and thrilling rides were the perfect escape from my humdrum small-town life. But ever since what happened to me last Labor Day at the amusement park in town, I'll never look at those places the same way again. It was closing weekend for the season and some friends invited me to check it out with them one last time. I jumped at the offer. I hadn't been there in years. We arrived on Sunday evening to enjoy the park decorated for the holiday with red, white, and blue banners and lights. Patriotic music blasting from the loudspeakers added to the festive atmosphere. My friends and I went on all our favorite rides: bumper cars, pendulum swings, and the rickety old wooden roller coaster. I screamed and laughed more than I had in ages. We gorged ourselves on candy apples, funnel cakes, and fried Oreos. It was the perfect last hurrah of summer, or so I thought. As the evening wore on, the crowd started thinning out. By 10 p.m., only a few straggling groups remained wandering the neon-lit midway. My friends' parents were picking them up at closing time, but my mom wasn't able to come get me until midnight when her late shift ended. No one seemed too concerned about me staying those extra couple hours alone. After all, it was a fairly sleepy town, and I'd been to the park a million times. What could go wrong? After my friends left, I spent the time riding some of the tamer rides and playing carnival games. The bored teenage employees barely looked up as they handed me stuffed animals I'd won at basketball tosses and water gun races. In retrospect, the lack of crowds should have been my first warning sign something was amiss, but I was too caught up in carefree excitement to notice. By 11:30, the colored lights shut off abruptly, leaving only harsh fluorescent bulbs illuminating the midway. Shadows crept behind the vacant food carts and game booths. Even the music went silent, leaving just the whistling wind through the remaining leaved branches. I suddenly felt very alone and anxious for my mom to arrive. I decided to wait by the front entrance so she could easily spot me. As I headed down the now gloomy midway, the rides surrounding me took on a creepy emptiness. I imagined them coming to life around me like a dark carnival from my worst nightmares. A chill ran down my neck that had nothing to do with the night air. When I reached the park gates, an eerie sight halted me in my tracks. One ride at the back of the park still had its lights on, the carousel. Calliope music played softly as the ride slowly spun with its empty horses bobbing up and down. Why would they leave just that one on? I wondered. Against my better judgment, I found myself wandering toward it, running my fingers over the painted horses as I passed. Their vacant eyes seemed to follow me as the platform revolved in a dizzying circle. When I reached the center, the carousel abruptly stopped moving. The music cut off, leaving just the lights still flickering. I shook my head, thinking power must have been shut off to the rest of the park. Time to get out of here. As I turned to leave, a loud clang rang out behind me. I whirled back around, and there, standing by the ride's control booth, was a teenage girl holding a metal crank. Had she been there the whole time? She looked about my age with stringy black hair half covering her pallid face. I think they closed already," I stammered. She didn't respond, just stared at me, tilting her head to the side like she was studying me. There was something not right about her, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "What's your name?" she asked finally. Her voice came out raspy like she wasn't used to speaking. "Alex," I answered hesitantly. "What about you?" "Angela. My mom runs the carousel. I help her keep it going." Her eyes bored into mine with frightening intensity. I knew I had to get away before things escalated. Summoning my courage, I feinted left, then broke right when Angela moved to stop me. The exit was just within reach. But before I could get there, hands grasped my shoulders, wrenching me violently back onto the carousel. I screamed and turned to see Angela glaring at me with eyes now pools of blackness. Her mouth stretched into an inhuman smile, revealing rows of pointed teeth. She gestured to the crank, which I now realized controlled the ride's speed. But why was she running it with the park closed and no one else around? "That's cool," I said, trying to inch my way towards the exit. "Well, I should get going. My ride's probably waiting." "Wait," Angela shouted suddenly. "Don't you want to try it out? There's still time for one more spin." Her eyes lit up and she cocked her head even further until it was practically sideways. Everything inside me was screaming to get away. But she stood between me and the only exit off the slowly revolving platform. No, that's okay," I started before she cut me off. "But the carousel loves new riders. It gets so lonely when no one pays attention." As she said this, Angela ran her hand almost lovingly over the nearest horse's mane. I swear its painted eyes glinted in response. "I really need to go," I asserted more forcefully. "My mom's waiting." I tried moving around Angela, but she quickly sidestepped to block my path again. "Not until you ride," she demanded. "Just one spin won't hurt." "The carousel wants you," she and several childlike voices whispered in unison. "Now you can ride forever and ever." Paralyzed with fear, I watched as ghostly, spectral forms emerged from the horses, advancing on me. Their skeletal fingers grasped at my clothes, trying to pull me onto a vacant steed. I twisted and thrashed, desperate to break free from their hold. "Let me go!" I shrieked. "Someone help!" But my pleading faded into the empty night. As I continued struggling, the carousel began spinning faster and faster. The flickering lights blurred into a disorienting smear. Angela and the spectral entities cackled louder. Furious, I was resisting. Suddenly, blinding headlights cut through the darkness. An engine roared, approaching. "My mom!" The carousel and its deranged inhabitants recoiled from the light, allowing me to finally wrench myself free of their grasp. I leaped from the ride and sprinted toward my mom's idling car. Her panicked face stared back at me through the windshield. I dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind me. "Go, quickly!" I screamed. Glancing back, I saw Angela's twisted sneer watching me escape. She slammed the crank down angrily, making the carousel resume its hypnotic spinning. I told my mom some psychotic employee attacked me, but couldn't bring myself to mention the ghosts. She was just relieved I got away in time. But I knew what I'd seen. I used to love amusement parks. But after that night, I'll never step foot in one again, especially not after dark. Because sometimes when the lights go out, the rides come to life in the most terrifying ways imaginable. I learned that lesson the hard way, nearly becoming just another lost soul, doomed to ride those decrepit carousel horses for all eternity.